Hey guys, this is John. I hope you're all doing well. All right, we're back at it in the Lone Wolf League on Lee Chess. This is round 6 of 11 in season, 37? So pivotal round. Every round lately seems pivotal, but the field is narrowing a bit towards the top. Here are our current standings. Happy mode is on 5 out of 5. Perfect score, the only perfect score in the field. And I think that's been the case for a round or two. There's a handful of players on 4.5 out of 5, so a half point back of happy mode. A couple of these players actually took a bye in the first round. So those of you who are maybe on the fence about the league in terms of availability, you can take buys. You can indicate that you're unavailable for certain rounds. You don't have to play all 11 games. I don't think you can play 1 or 2 games and not play another 9 or 10, but don't quote me on that. But there are buys available, and you can just mark yourself as unable to play in certain rounds if you let them know in advance. So yeah, a few players on 4.5 out of 5. And then we get into the 4s. I am part of that score group right here. This is me. So not a whole ton of 4s. So like I said, the field is thinning out a little bit. And in this round, I am playing this player, When Rooks Fly. Great username. Rated 2166 classical on Lee Chess. When Rooks Fly actually lost their first game, but they're coming off 4 wins in a row. An interesting thing about this round, guys, I actually didn't know about this until I prepared for the game and played the game and was just looking on the Slack channel for the league afterwards. But my opponent actually recorded his preparation and the game real time. Okay, so he did exactly what I've been doing for all of these rounds. And it's pretty interesting. I didn't get a chance to watch both of the videos that he posted because he did them in 2 separate videos, his preparation and then the game. But from what I did watch, I think you guys will want to take a look because there was an interesting clash of various aspects in this matchup. So I won't say anything more in the interest of not spoiling things. But yeah, shout out to When Rooks Fly. I'm going to link those 2 videos in the description and also the pinned comment to this video. So do take a look at what he produced based on this game. All right, so big one. We got to keep moving here in the standings, hopefully move up. Let's see what happens in this round, shall we? Round 6 of 11. Let's roll the tape. All right, so there are 25 minutes before the game starts. This is my opponent, When Rooks Fly. He has 4 out of 5 in the league so far. Looks like he's from the United Kingdom. Crowborough, I'm going to guess that's in England. Oh, and actually, today's Independence Day here in the US, so that's kind of awkward for both of us, isn't it? A lot of pressure. All right. So we're going to do our usual. We're going to take a look at When Rooks Fly's recent games in the league and just try to get a feel for this player's style and what I might be able to expect. I do notice straight away that this player doesn't have so many games in their history. So, from a preparation standpoint, that can be good or bad. Sometimes you have just less to work with in general as a result of that. Sometimes you might get lucky, actually, and the games that the opponent does have in their archive are ones that hit your repertoire really hard. But usually you just have less to work with. So, all right, let's click into the classical games that this player has played because this is a classically rated league. Okay, so I do have the black pieces in this game, and I see that When Rooks Fly had the white pieces in the last game. E4 player, at least in this game, played the white side of a Carol Khan. And I'm looking at time management here. This is theoretical stuff. I want to know how prepared this player is in general. Yeah, this H-pawn run, that's pretty standard stuff these days. Looks like a nice position for black. Black was, pressuring D4, took the pawn. Maybe got overextended. Yeah, their king got driven out. So maybe bishop takes D4 wasn't so great for black. But this game is interesting to me because I might play my Scandinavian against E4. And that would be no surprise to this player if they did any preparation work whatsoever. All right. So let's go back. This is a game they played from the black side. They played the Berlin defense. Okay. They went into this Berlin endgame. Ended up winning. Time management, pretty good in the opening. Then started taking a lot of time right around here. I can definitely relate to that. Okay. This game, 30 plus 30. Yep, this is probably league game. They face the Owens defense, e4, b6. Quick trade of the light square bishops. Looks like black was on the run in this one. Okay. Is that? Yeah, that was okay. Just looking at, once again, the league games. That was an e4, e5 game. When Rooks Fly was playing black. This is a game, I think the very first one, maybe that When Rooks Fly played in the league. Maybe second game. Looks like this player doesn't back down from theory. And if I was getting really in-depth here, I might go look at these comments even to try to get into the head of this particular player. But we don't have a whole ton of time. So, yeah, I mean, from what I've seen so far, this player's pretty principled. Plays theory. A lot of e4 stuff in their archive. Okay, here's a d4 game they played from the white side. Another d4 game. Some Sicilians. Looks like they mix it up from the black side, too. Remember, we saw that Berlin game, but here's a game in the Sicilian that When Rooks Fly played. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is just narrow this down a little more. So let's click into that very first game, go to the player section. You guys have seen me do this in every game that I prepared for, every game I played in this league. So we're going to click the little toggle here, change the player When Rooks Fly. It even like auto populates for you based on the profile that you were just looking at. So, okay. Let's go here. And When Rooks Fly from the white side, I should flip. Okay, wow. Actually, knight f3 is their top played move as white. In all recent games, 2025, could be mixing in some surprises. You never know. Uh-huh. Okay. So this is similar to a previous game that I had in the league. Yeah, I wouldn't mind going into something like this. This was probably a bullet game, though, huh? Yeah, very fast game. Could be the case that this player just uses knight f3 in faster games. Let's just click into some here. Yeah, bullet. Some players do have a bullet repertoire versus, you know, their normal repertoire. So these were all bullet games, it appears. At least everyone I click on has been. And I could further narrow this down by time control, too. So if we really want to rule out the bullet games, we'll do this. Yeah, and that seems to be the case. So when I filtered it for blitz games and longer, suddenly knight f3 disappears. So I think pretty unlikely we're going to see knight f3 on move one. So it looks like d4, e4, some c4 thrown in. So does When Rooks Fly have anything in the Scandinavian? Nothing in the Scandinavian whatsoever. So if I do play Scandi, I will be flying blind, which is a nice challenge. I've been working on my Scandinavian material quite a bit, so I wouldn't mind that, but we'll see. Okay, I am intrigued by what this player does. Okay, I often play the Con Sicilian A6 here. What about, there's no instances of classical Sicilian either. So I do often play this variation in the Sicilian. Bringing out both knights to f6, c6. I feel pretty comfortable here. But nothing to work with there. I play e4, e5 every once in a while. Even though you probably haven't seen hardly any examples of me playing that in recent years, but I do know this a little bit. So if white plays e4, I think I'm going to go Scandi. I think I'm going to see what happens against the unknown preparation of my opponent in this opening. I think it'll be a nice challenge. I've been working on the Scandinavian material intensively for the past couple of years. So, of course, I feel pretty good about it. There's always a chance I could get caught in some sharp line. But hey, I think my experience advantage is going to be worth a lot. So what else can we really glean here? This might be a short prep session because, okay, there's a chance that they could play d4. There are some recent games there, so I should probably look at it. Maybe some Jobava London, huh? Okay, so Jobava London is in my opponent's repertoire. Knight c3 followed by bishop to f4. Not sure I'm keen to face a Jobava London today, just because that would require a little more depth to figure out how to neutralize. So if d4 is played, I might play something a little more flexible. So what do they do against knight f6? Probably still knight c3. Yeah, I might go for something like c5 here and try to force white to play a Benoni type position, but with the knight occupying c3 and the white pawn not reaching there. I could definitely play this sort of thing. I have experience here. So yeah, I might mix it up and play knight f6. And if white plays bishop f4 right away, just the traditional London system, I've had pretty good results with systems involving d6, where you block the light square bishop. So knight can come to d7, maybe pawn e5. Yeah, I think I can work with this. And what about c4? Yeah, as expected against c4, the replies for black are all over the map. Black really does have a lot of flexibility in how to meet this move. So I play c6 a lot. No games found with that. I played e5 as well, which is essentially a reverse Sicilian. Maybe we can see how this player played in this line. Pretty standard stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't mind some variation of this type of thing as well. But I somehow doubt they're going to play c4. I think we're going to get e4, maybe d4, but I don't know. I just have this feeling like my opponent's going to want to challenge me in my Scandinavian. So could play Scandi. Again, I have half a mind to play a Sicilian too, because I do see that they play open Sicilian. And I can play this classical variation. I actually really like these lines. I studied this pretty intensively a few years ago. So maybe I'll even do that. I mean, I'll have to decide, of course, right after white plays e4. So it'd be nice to know what I'm going to do going into it. I think classical would be a bit of a surprise. So I don't feel unconfident in the Scandi, of course, but when you're flying blind like this, there's just such an asymmetry in the amount of information my opponent can search on me in this opening versus what I can predict from them, which is nothing. I kind of want to play something. I'm talking myself into this, but I kind of want to play something that I'm familiar with, but doesn't just give away that asymmetric opening advantage right from the jump. And it's actually very useful for me that they play open Sicilian, which is knight f3 followed by d4. Maybe white will surprise me if we get to this point, but if I get here and I play d6 and we get into this, I haven't looked concretely at this theory in a while, but I remember most of the stuff, and it's going to produce an interesting position and an interesting game, I think. So, yeah, I was leaning Scandi, but now I think against e4, I'm going to plan to go Sicilian. And against d4, I'm going to play knight f6. And assuming white plays knight c3, because it doesn't look like they mess with d4, c4 whatsoever. But assuming they play knight c3, I think I will mix it up a little bit and play c5. Try to get into a Benoni type position like this. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap this session here. Pretty short prep session, but I'm leaving myself 10 or so minutes just to relax before the game. I highly recommend that, by the way. Don't spend all your time preparing up until the very last minute. I know you tournament players can relate to that. Sometimes people are preparing literally as they're walking out of their hotel room door and going down to the playing site, taking the elevator or the stairs down. Don't do that. Give yourself at least 10, 15 minutes, preferably even longer, to collect your thoughts. All right, so game against When Rooks Fly coming up. Should be a fun one. All right, and we are off here. Good luck to my opponent. Enjoy the game. 30 plus 30 chess coming up in the Lone Wolf League. This is round 6, right? Round 6. Okay. Opponent rated 2176 classical on Lichess. I've got my lemon and ginger tea. I've got my iced coffee, which is actually iced espresso. And then I've got my water as well. Okay, and a little surprise. So no E4 on move 1. Wait, why are there no board sounds? I did not get a board sound there. Guess we'll find out as we go along. I think that was muted on my end. Okay, so D4. And I'm going to play the move that I mentioned, knight F6. I could also play G6, but I don't like allowing E4. So let's go with knight F6. So maybe we were both thinking the same thing. There's a little mental duel going on there, because on E4, for sure, When Rooks Fly had to have expected the Scandinavian. But towards the end, I talked myself out of playing the Scandinavian and in favor of playing the classical Sicilian, but that wasn't to be. So knight C3, so they stick to their repertoire, looking for Jobava London stuff. Yeah, and here I mentioned C5. Another move that crosses my mind is D6, but then we could get into a Pirtz, and I'm not so keen to play that. So I think I'm going to go with C5. And we're going to play an original game. Maybe my opponent's faced this before. Probably has at some time control. But I highly doubt they would have expected this. And I hope we get an interesting game out of it. Okay, and white does the principled thing. They advance the pawn. Taking is not concerning at all, because black can pretty easily recover the pawn, almost always. So white does play D5. Yeah, and now I could go D6, take it into this Schmid-Benoni type territory. There are aggressive lines where white can try to establish multiple pawns in the center. So it does cross my mind to maybe do something else even, but you're going to have to play D6, G6 at some point regardless. I could play E6, I could play E5, but all the moves I'm describing are pretty standard. So let's go D6. And we're going to play with this structure. Yeah, E4. All right, G6. And I do wonder what white's going to do, because, again, one of the more principled things to do is to think about playing F4 and knight F3. But very quickly, white plays knight F3. So they have both of their knights in front of their bishop pawns. Yeah, I mean, I could try to exchange my light square bishop for the knight, but that seems a little premature. It's possible white will try to keep my light square bishop at bay, but that's not uncommon in this opening. So let's just play bishop G7. Yep, bishop C4, pretty standard. I'll castle. I expect white's going to do the same. Maybe white will throw in this H3 move. Okay, so now it becomes interesting whether I want to think about bishop G4. Because traditionally the way I've tried to play this position has been knight A6 to C7, and then work up to A6 and B5. Sometimes by means of rook B8 thrown in there, especially if white plays A4. But let's think for a moment. We've both blitzed out these opening moves. So the reason bishop G4 comes to mind for me is because generally in these Benoni formations, it's an achievement for black to exchange one pair of minor pieces, because black lacks the sufficient amount of space as things currently stand for their minor pieces. Okay, so if I play knight BD7, it's going to block my light square bishop. If I put the bishop on D7, that's a pretty objectionable square, but there's very little chance my knight comes to that square anytime soon. So G4 is really the only other logical square for the bishop, and the logical pattern of development to make all this fit. So I could think about it right now. It's just, do I want to surrender the bishop pair after H3 takes knight BD7? Yeah, I'd be looking at knight E5, but I think white's going to back off their queen. Probably queen D1 is what I would do. It could be a little hard to drum up counterplay. So I'm thinking I want to go for this knight a6 plan instead. I like this. It's in my wheelhouse. And we can pivot that knight to c7, maybe even get into b4 if white happens to play a4 too soon. So yeah, knight a6 is the direction I'm leaning. Just thinking about bishop g4, h3, take on f3, knight bd7, threatening knight e5, queen d1, let's say a6, a4. I think black's doing okay there, but it could be a little hard to drum up counterplay. So let's go with knight a6. Now notice I'm not playing a6 first, because if I play a6, white's almost certainly going to play a4 to stop b5. And then I can't get my knight to the a6 square anymore. Okay, so I'm playing knight a6 because I want to keep my a pawn flexible. I also want to keep my light square bishop flexible. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be dropping this knight back to c7. We have another emote matchup. It's the shark versus the some type of bird. I don't know what kind of bird that is, but appropriate for the username. When rooks fly. When pigs fly. Could have put a pig in there. Yeah, critical matchup here. My opponent's significantly lower rated. I mean, I am higher rated than I think everyone in this league. I am either the first or the second seed going into this season. So not surprising that there's a rating gap, but this player's a little lower rated than players I've faced in recent rounds. And I have the black pieces. I pretty much need to score, get another victory if I want to keep pace. Because I did see that Happy Mode won their previous game. So Happy Mode, the player who beat me recently, a couple games ago, they're in the sole lead by a full point. Or maybe there's someone who's a half point behind, but they're in the sole lead and they control their destiny, most importantly. So you might be wondering, am I concerned about bishop takes a6? And the answer is no. Even though this would give me double isolated pawns, I would like the fact that I'm getting the bishop pair, and I would really like the fact that I'm getting the half open b file to work with. That would be a big achievement for black, to be able to post that rook on b8, fire towards that pawn on b2. There's a lot of things that could easily go wrong for white there. So yeah, normally you got to watch for moves like bishop takes a6, and developing your knight through the side of the board may not make a lot of sense in many positions, but I'm not concerned about this move here. And I have a clear plan of playing knight c7 and eventually working up to b5. But we should be aware that white's going to try to prevent b5 for many, many moves if they're understanding what's going on. And I'm pretty sure the game will go in a direction like this, but as soon as I pivot the knight back to c7, I won't be surprised if white plays a4. Maybe they'll wait for me to play a6, but there is a chance on knight c7 I could play b5 anyways. Despite white having one more attacker on that square, unless white's defending the e4 pawn, I would be happy with that trade. So, yeah, I mean, white might play rook e1 on this move or coming up. That would do it. But suffice it to say, at the moment, b5 looks threatening for me. White's almost certainly going to play a4. And I might have to work up to the b5 push. It can require some maneuvering. So yeah, h3, that move makes a lot of sense. Ruling out the bishop g4 thing for good. Also rules out knight g4 if I ever want to try to get to e5. So I think here I'm going to play knight c7. Let's play it. Not a whole lot else to consider. And here's where b5, yeah, so white does play a4 because b5 was a strategic threat, I would say. because I would want that pawn on e4. So the fact that white has played a4 before I go a6 does give me some incentive to maybe pivot the knight back to a6 to try to get into this b4 square. It's a little extravagant. I don't think it's the best way of playing whatsoever, but I can consider it. But I think what I'm going to do here is probably play b6 first. And why am I playing b6? Well, if I play a6, there's a good chance white can play a5. And then whenever the b pawn push comes, even if it's prepared by rook b8, white can capture on b6, whether it'll probably be en passant, but b5, they'll play a takes b6 en passant. That structure is not so great for black a lot of times. You might have to accept that structure sooner or later, but I don't want to go headlong into that structure. So I think I'm going to play b6, then a6, then rook b8, really work up to this b5 move. And if white plays b6, a5, then I can play rook b8, or actually I can even maybe play b5 at that moment. So I think that's probably going to be the plan. Now, I do have to watch e5 under some circumstances. So if b6, let's say rook to e1, I might even want to throw in bishop b7 at that point. I kept having to adjust the mic, and now it's more sturdy. So I'm pretty sure we're still in theory here. This doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. Rook e1 would make a lot of sense. Bishop f4 makes a lot of sense in this type of position. Having that bishop coming to b7 is very nice and holding up the whole e5 stuff, though. So I don't know if it's conclusively going to stop e5, but it's nice in slowing it down. e6 is another thing black can think about at some point. So if I want to stab in the center with this move, could be good under some circumstances. So undoubtedly black has less space in this line, but black is quite solid. And there are these little long-term plans of trying to break out, as I've been describing. I do wonder about e6 on the prior move instead of b6. It's probably a move I should have considered more deeply. It usually creates some problems with the d6 square, but I do wonder, given white played a4, if switching it up and playing in the center would have made sense. So we'll keep it in mind, but I think I'm going to pursue this b6, a6, maybe rook b8 plan. I'm probably going to throw in bishop b7, though. This is fairly flexible, but if e5 is at all looking dangerous, I think it makes sense to throw in bishop b7 first. So hypothetical line here, let's say rook e1, bishop b7, bishop f4, a6. Sometimes there's a standoff that can result because it looks like white is just completely geared up towards e5, but it always runs into the capture and white losing the d5 pawn at the end. So they might try to move their queen. So let's say rook e1, bishop b7, bishop f4, a6, maybe queen e2 or queen d3. Let's say queen e2. And there too, it looks like white is ready for e5. They're pretty close to it, but if they take the queen off the d file, that's another defender they lack on the d5 square. So maybe queen d3. I know I've faced that type of move before, but maybe that's better. There, white can observe all the central pawns still, while also creating this queen bishop battery towards my queen side. And if that happens, what will I do? I can still think about b5 in various forms. I can pivot my knight back to d7, although arguably e5 makes more sense then for white. Sometimes knight h5 crops up at various times. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. It's funny. I wonder if I was inspired to play this way because in the video I released right before I played this game, it was using the clock as a weapon game, and I won a game as black in this setup. And it was just a 3+0 blitz game, but it was kind of fun to play. Okay, so white does play bishop f4 as planned. Yeah, that move and rook e1 are kind of interchangeable, it seems to me. So makes sense. So am I going to play bishop b7? Probably. So let's do it. I'll try to keep this slight lead on the clock that I enjoy. That would be nice. These positions are really bringing me back to my youth because I played this stuff pretty frequently when I was in high school, college a little bit as well. So basically as a teenager into my early 20s. Then I switched to more d4, d5 stuff as black, giving up less space. But some of this Schmid, Benoni, Benko stuff is still in my memory banks. I still got some muscle memory for that. So let's think. Rook e1, a6, and then queen d3. I do think queen d3 is one of the more logical moves. One other maneuvering plan I can pursue at that point is rook b8, and then moving my bishop and trying to go for b5. But again, if white is pointed with their queen and bishop at the a6 pawn, that might be hard to pull off. Because at the moment I play bishop a8, I'm liable to allow bishop takes a6. So yeah, rook e1 followed by queen d3 is probably the principled thing to do. I like the fact that white is thinking. That bodes well for me because maybe white isn't so familiar with this middle game. But so far, I mean, they've been doing a lot of logical stuff. But I'm happy to have that slight lead on the clock. I'm going to try my best to keep that. So for now, holding up e5 is very nice. I don't want that e5 move landing, opening the position at an awkward time. So we like that counterplay against the d-pawn. But I can't assume that's always going to be the case. There might come a time where white has maybe their a rook on the d file as well, where e5 could be a threat. So we got to prepare for that. So rook e1, a6, queen d3. Yeah, rook e1 played. So a6, queen d3. I think that's the main line I'm considering at the moment. Sometimes rook e8 is helpful to black. So pivoting the rook here could be good in a bid for e6 at some point. This is all pretty logical from white's standpoint, though, so I got to assume that they're going to find a move like queen d3. But who knows? Maybe they'll play queen e2. Also an option. You know, one other thing that comes to my memory banks is sometimes, so let's say a6, queen d3, sometimes black plays knight h5 and then f5, believe it or not. So hits the bishop and then tries to stab with the pawn. Sometimes they play that as a reaction to e5, actually, if I'm remembering correctly. So do I play a6 here? I think I do. Because I'm not sure so many other moves make sense. So let's just play it. Throw the move back at white. There are some circumstances where that knight h5 move could be annoying, for sure, to white. So I'm going to keep that in mind. Maybe if b5 happens and there's some trades, maybe knight h5 and the bishop hitting the pawn on b2 could be useful in some universe. There's possibilities. But I'm still looking at queen d3 because I think it checks a number of different boxes for white. Allows that rook to come to d1, further holds up b5, pressures the a6 point. Even though I have a6 well defended, that's nice for white if I ever start trying to angle for b5 further. I'm looking concretely what I'm going to do after queen d3, but I'm also scouring my memory banks for ideas I've seen. You know, I've mentioned this knight h5 and f5 thing. I don't think that's appropriate after queen d3. Sometimes black pivots with knight d7. I know that move probably looks very natural, but the problem with knight d7 is you interrupt. You actually take away two pieces from attacking d5. So it's more likely white's going to shove e5 at you if you play that way. Okay, and white plays queen d2, so a little more restrained. Now, this is where I start to think about whether b5 could make sense in some positions by means of a series of trades. Because I might be able to win that pawn on e4 at the end in some cases. Or maybe with knight h5 thrown in somewhere, it could make sense. Probably doesn't quite work yet. Probably doesn't quite work. But to me, queen d2 looks a little looser than queen d3. I'm sure it's perfectly good, though, so I don't think I want to read into this too much. But b5, a takes b5, a takes b5. Let's say rook takes a8. In between move. Yeah, I could take with the queen. But then either way, white takes looks to be fine. Knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes b5. White keeps e4 guarded. I probably have a little play down the file, but I'm sure that's not great. So, okay, what else? So, rook e8, I think makes sense here. That's a move that's just helpful in a lot of circumstances. If ever white plays e5, it's nice that I have further defense on the e file. So that comes to mind. Also, if white's gunning for bishop h6, I can keep my bishop if I want. I can play bishop h8 without losing the rook on f8. So rook e8 for sure is a move. But we got to also assume white's probably going to put their rook on d1 and just sit on this position. So how do I feel about that? Rook e8, rook a d1. Could play some sort of e5 move there. Not sure I buy it though. e5, white takes en passant to take with the knight. Bishop takes d6. Probably nothing doing there. So rook e8's still a candidate for me. But I think I have to assume that rook ad1 is going to be white's next move. So rook b8 could be another candidate move. And slowly working up to b5. I could rationalize that from the standpoint that with white's queen on d2 versus d3, when I play bishop a8 eventually, white can't play bishop takes a6. But there are downsides to rook b8. So on rook b8, e5 becomes more of a legitimate thing because if I were to take on e5, bishop takes e5, my knight is pinned on c7. So I don't think I can take on d5 at that point. That's the downside of that approach. Rook b8, e5, there's knight h5. That's a theme that I mentioned before. But do I want to rely on that? I'm not so sure. But I kind of like rook b8. It also introduces b5 even without preparation sometimes, because white can get ambushed on the file when things eventually open up. So maybe rook b8. Rook b8. I think e5 is critical. And then knight h5 is what I would do. Knight to h5. Hit the bishop. And there's ideas, let's say bishop h2 there, then playing that f5 move that I mentioned. Going forward at that point, which looks really weird, I know, but it actually makes a lot of sense in many situations. You can try to shut out the enemy bishop with f4. It's not as crazy of an idea as it looks. So rook b8, e5, knight h5. How are we feeling about that? Bishop h2, f5. So sort of bypassing the white pawn. And then, I don't know, I think I can work up to b5. The pressure on d6 is lessened because with the pawn on f5, white can't play knight e4. So bizarrely, often that move is pretty helpful with that. So I'm leaning towards rook b8, and time is now even. I think I might go for it. Because rook e8 seems a little limp, and I'm not seeing other moves that make a whole ton of sense to me. Yeah, let's play it. Let's go rook b8. Aligning on the b file. You can see that much of black's counterplay is connected to this b5 move, trying to eventually achieve that. So we'll see if I'm able to do that. It can take a lot of maneuvering, and even then you might not get it in. This is typical for a Benoni, though. So time management wise, I'm feeling much better in this game than in other recent games. Position wise, I think I'm worse here. I'm sure the computer's going to say white's better. It usually does in this line. But there's interesting ideas that black has, and with great space comes great responsibility, as I've said before. So the fact that white has that proud pawn established on d5, nice development, that's not the end of the story. They got to maintain, and there's this pressure to increase that advantage too, and to seize further space. Because if they stall out, I've got counterplay coming, hopefully, in the form of this b5 move. Oh yeah, another plan that comes to mind Sometimes in this setup, white plays rook b1 and tries to go b4. That's a setup that I remember encountering sometimes. But it looks like white's playing pretty classically in this game. Just muster the pieces in the center. Maybe white will even adjust the queen to d3, but I sort of doubt it. I think rook d8 or rook d1 is going to be the move. So on rook d1, I think I'm going to play the bishop a8 move. That would be my default, at least. Because then I would be prepared to play b5. And white does play rook d1. So bishop a8 with b5 on tap. Is that what we're doing? Is that the way we're going to play the game? White could still go for e5 at that point. But I think on bishop a8, they're probably going to move their queen. I somehow sense queen d3 is going to be played. So how do I feel about that? Bishop a8, queen d3. And then my pawn on a6 is hit. If I play queen c8, maybe then white goes e5. But I always have the knight h5 move. But white can go bishop h2. Hard to say. What about this? So can I play b5 with the idea pawn takes b5, pawn takes b5, knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes b5. I have bishop takes d5 at the end. Ooh, this might be the way. But I have to look at the other permutation. If white takes with the bishop first, how does that work? Because then knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes d5. Maybe white can throw in a capture on d6. There's some trades. I take b2 at the end. In my experience, these trades are almost always good for black when they happen, because by default, you're distracting white from their play in the center. So actually, I wasn't thinking down this line of play, but I wonder if b5 is going to work with bishop takes d5 at the end being the point. Ooh. This is one of these things, once I see that, I'm pretty confident I'm going to go for this if I can at all make it work. So b5, we get the trade. Sometimes you can take it with the knight, by the way, but let's say we just take the standard way. Let's say knight takes, bishop takes d5 with the discovery. So bishop takes d5. Let's say e takes d5, rook takes b5. Hit that b pawn. I mean, white might just play b3 there, but I gotta believe that that's an achievement. Got this compact pawn formation. White has 2 pawn islands. I'm good with that. We've traded, we've broken out. I like the look of that. So b5. And then what about that bishop takes permutation? I mentioned knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes d5. That's not the only move, too. I see maybe I can play bishop a6 even. Yeah, I think we're going for b5 here, folks. I think we're going to do it. Yeah, I just like everything I'm looking at here. I don't think it's going to win me the game by any means. It's just a breakout move, but it makes sense with rook b8. I get a bunch of counterplay. I suspect white just missed that at the end of this line that I have bishop takes d5. That would be my guess as far as what white missed. But the game will continue. Pawn takes d5, rook takes b5, b3, like I said. White's d5 pawn is a little loose there. But this is by no means going to win me the game right away. I might not even be better after all that. But I'm going to go for it. Let's play it. And I think on a takes b5, there's really no point in knight takes, so I can pre-move a takes b5. Yeah, this is the first moment in this game where I felt like white has dropped the ball a bit. But I've said this in other games and it hasn't panned out in the way that I expected. So I'm tempering my expectations. Again, I think even with this line that I described, I don't see myself being better. But I do think I can probably claim equality at minimum. And the nature of the position transforms. And I'll probably have a more compact pawn structure at the end of this. I think you guys will see that in the next few moves. Time pretty much even. For white, you really got to take multiple times on b5. I would be surprised if white took once and then back the bishop off. I don't think that'll happen because white doesn't want to give me b4. That starts pushing around their knight, gaining space on the queen side. So I think we're going to see multiple trades on b5. So my main line is a takes b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, bishop takes d5, unveiling the attack on white's bishop. E takes d5, rook takes b5. Now I did look at the end of that. I don't think I expressed this, but white does get the half open e file towards my pawn on e7. So I made sure on something like queen b2 that not only could I take on b2, but I always have rook b7 if I need it to drop back to the 7th rank. And my rook has a clear line of sight to that pawn on e7 because the bishop and the knight have been exchanged on c7 and b7. Or those pieces are gone from those squares. So I feel pretty strongly we're going to see a takes b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, bishop takes d5, e takes d5, rook takes d5, and then b3. I feel like b3 will be played. And at that stage, I suspect I should start trying to play towards white's queen side, although rook b4 actually looks pretty interesting at that point. At the very end of that line, which not only creates some potential threats with rook takes d5, knight takes d5, idea queen takes d5, rook takes f4, but also knight e4 could be on the table. That is interesting. Maybe white can go bishop h6 though in reply. Allow knight e4. I still might get into c3 though. Not sure. Maybe I throw in rook e8. I think in this line that I described, playing rook e8 at the end would be good because then bishop h6, I can always meet with bishop h8. And I guard that e7 point in advance. Thanks again to everyone watching this game. Looks like we have 20 spectators. I see some familiar names from the league in the spectator list. And thanks to all you guys for watching these games and following me along in this season. It's been a lot of fun. And thanks for those who've been wondering about my voice. I've had some voice issues the past couple years, a lot of hoarseness, pain when speaking. So I've been doing better in these games. and in general lately, but I'm still trying to pace myself when I can. I haven't been streaming as much. I really haven't streamed hardly at all in the past month because I'm trying to be more mindful of just how much I'm using my voice. It's hard to talk for, yeah, like any of you who've given speeches, presentations, I'm sure you can relate to this, but just monologuing for longer than even 15, 30 minutes is really difficult. And you kind of got to train yourself properly, take the right precautions, and do some warm ups even so you can do that. Some people seem to have voices where maybe they're lighter and brighter. They can just speak for long periods of time on end, but I'm not one of those people. I'm just not. So I do my best, but I have to keep my expectations in mind too. So this is promising. White's thinking a lot. I'm sure they don't like what they're seeing here because they see my idea now at this point. But I do think they're going to have to go down this line where there's multiple trades on b5. Maybe White will take with the bishop first, but I doubt it. That just looks like an inferior version of all this. So I think they're going to play a takes b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5. They're just going to have to go for it. So there's the first trade. It's nice for me to play this way too because my moves are forced. So knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, bishop takes d5. Just taking a quick look to see if there's any way I can tweak the move order to make this stronger. Ooh, here's a thought. Can I play bishop a6 maybe? Idea, knight takes c7, bishop takes c4, and then claiming that the knight is trapped. That would be something. That would be something. Then if e5, can probably play knight h5. Ooh, interesting. Now, bishop a6, White does have knight a3. So does that really achieve me more than my intended line? I don't know. Bishop a6, knight a3. Rook takes b2. Doesn't look like it really helps me much. I don't like that my queen doesn't have easy access to the a5 square there, let's say. So bishop a6 is interesting. I definitely didn't consider this move straight away, but I don't see it being better than knight takes b5, bishop takes d5. Bishop a6, knight a3. I think I'm going to have to go for what I mentioned originally. So let's take. We're going to take here and unveil the attack. So e takes d5, rook takes b5, hitting the b pawn. And probably White's going to want to place b3 there. I don't think c4 is as good because c4, rook b3, and that pawn on b2 starts to look pretty weak. So all this happens. Get a bunch of trades. So this is what I was talking about. White has this half open e-file now towards my pawn. I always got to watch stuff like queen e2. But as I was describing, I can play rook b7 if I need to. Probably even better to take on b2, though. Queen takes e7. Then d6 is hit. I don't know. Maybe there's some things to calculate there. But it's nice. When you're calculating like this, it's just useful, especially from far away. If I know on queen e2, I can always play rook b7 if I want to. That's probably all I need to make this series of trades. This looks really funny in the notation, by the way. It's just like b5, 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 d5, b5 again. In the notation box. So yeah, if you can identify a safe move, something that keeps your position nice and secure at the end of a forcing sequence in advance of that sequence happening, that's great for calculation. That's very, very helpful. because it kind of gives you a little safeguard. Okay, and white plays c4. So yeah, I don't think that's a great move. And the reason why, although it connects the pawn to d5, this pawn on b3 is now worryingly backwards. Or on b2, I should say, is looking pretty weak. So I think now I start to go into grind mode. Rook b2, or rook b4 rather. Attack the pawn on c4. Rook b3 was also a thought, but I think rook b4 makes more sense now that I look at this. Although maybe rook b4, white can try to do queen c1 and then bishop d2, bishop c3. Maybe that's white's plan, to pivot the bishop back. That would be interesting. Can they pull that off, though? Do they have the time to do that? Rook b4, queen c1, knight h5. Unveil the attack on b2 and hit their bishop. I would love to trade my knight for their dark square bishop. That would be a dream. So I think rook b4 makes sense here. Rook b4, but yeah, if white moves the queen, knight h5 is good under all these circumstances. Actually, I think knight h5 is good against almost anything white does. Because they have to take a timeout to defend against rook takes c4. This is nice for me because rook b4 is another move I can play pretty quickly. I'm not, but I'm trying to make sure my logic is sound here. Rook b4, and when white takes a moment to defend the pawn, I play knight h5. I say, hey, you got problems on your bishop, and you especially have problems on your b2 pawn. That looks good. I mean, I don't think I'm going to talk myself into playing rook b3. So let's go rook b4. And maybe if I play it relatively quickly, white won't sense the danger here with knight h5. Because I could see that being white's idea. Maybe they're thinking, move the queen to the c file, free up the d2 square, try to quickly pivot the bishop to c3 and oppose my bishop. And most importantly, block the pressure on the b2 pawn. But they might not get that chance. Just because how this can go down. Okay, in fairness, they could play bishop c1, couldn't they? So if white specifically plays queen c2, with the idea of knight h5, bishop c1, maybe then they can work their way up to, I don't know, some unwind where the bishop does come to c3. Whoa! This move I did not consider whatsoever. That is creative. Surprise me. Whoa. Okay, I instantly see the point. It's very interesting. Did I get baited into allowing white to use the c6 square? Maybe. Maybe. But first instinct, this is not so clear. I did miss it. No doubt about that. So the idea, c takes d4, queen takes b4. But hold up. There's some stuff to consider here. Queen b6, knight c6, rook takes b2. White can take e7, but I just sidestep with the king. Okay, I mean, their knight's annoying. They've got pressure on the d6 point, to be fair. Very creative. That takes some foresight. That move was just not on my radar whatsoever. I kind of have to allow the knight in, I think, because knight e4 is a move I looked at just now. But rook takes e4. If I play bishop takes d4, white can take on d4, and my rook hangs at the end. I think that doesn't work. I mean, I could bail out with rook takes b2, queen takes b2 to take on d4 then, but that's no good. We don't want to do that. So looks like I might have to allow this knight into c6. Just how do we feel about that? Visually, it's unpleasant, no doubt. But I'm still going to be able to take queenside pawn or two. d5 might become weak for white as well. No guarantees. No guarantees. Knight h5 still comes to mind in certain lines. So, okay, let's start rook takes c4, knight c6. And then where to put the queen? Because if I go to b6, knight takes e7, I think white can play bishop takes d6 at the end. Or no, they can't because my queen will be defending. So rook takes c4, knight c6, queen b6. Which way does white take on e7? Can take with the knight, king h8. Maybe then they pivot back to c6. A little bit strange. I mean, there's knight e4 stuff. Knight takes d5 even. Ugh. A lot of stuff to work out here. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed I missed knight d4, for sure. So I could play queen b6 right away if I want. That might be the most flexible thing to do. Guard the rook. White's going to play knight c6. But then I have my choice. It's dealer's choice which way I want to take on b2. So queen b6, knight c6. Let's say I take with the rook. Rook takes b2. Knight takes e7, king h8. Then white's going to move their queen somewhere. I do have that d6 square guarded, which is nice. But also, where does white put their queen? Queen e3, maybe rook e8. I can pin them. So queen b6, knight c6, rook takes b2. White could go... They might not play knight takes e7 right away too, by the way, but... And there's also the rook takes c4 move as well. I'm not sure which way I want to take. Boy, tough call here. I think queen b6 makes a lot of sense still. Is there a possibility for a strategic sacrifice? C takes d4, queen takes b4, and then pivot the knight. Knight d7, try to come to c5. Don't quite buy it. This white will have the b pawn. My pieces occupy pretty good squares, but it feels like a cop-out. You know? Feels like not the right line of play for me. That's why I'm looking at queen b6 more. Queen b6, knight c6. It's just hard to know which way to take on c4 or b2. Rook takes b2 seems more logical, but knight takes e7, king h8. Let's say queen c1. I'd want some counterplay pretty quickly there, ideally, I think. And I'm not sure I'm seeing it because my knight has a hard time coming to e4 at that point. So rook takes c4, knight c6. And then queen b6. It's really coming back to queen b6, so I think I might want to play queen b6 now. In the absence of something better, because I'm not seeing where my queen would go otherwise. Unless I'm going to go for the c takes d4, queen takes b4 line, but that just doesn't seem right. Knight d7. I mean, I could play that position, but I'm skeptical. Queen b5, white's pawns start rolling. So before I play queen b6, knight c6, I want to have an idea which pawn I'm going to take. Rook takes c4, let's say. I think rook takes c4 is the better pawn to capture. So rook takes c4. Leave it up to white to figure out which way they're going to take, I guess. Seeing some stuff with knight takes d5 in certain lines, too. Hmm. Is there any case for rook b6? I think probably not. Could sack the exchange. There's also knight b5. Looks a little annoying. Oh, I don't know. Queen b6, knight c6, rook takes c4. Rook takes e7, let's say. Position's kind of a mess. I don't know, though. I feel like my coordination just isn't as great in those lines. That's the major thing I don't like about all this. Hence the strength of knight d4. So queen b6, knight c6. I'm really not sure which pawn to even take at that point. Rook takes b2. Seems hard to muster up play against either way. Really torn here. Queen b6. I got to make a decision pretty soon. Queen b6, knight c6. So if rook takes b2, just queen c1. And I don't really see, or knight takes e7 and then queen c1. I don't really see what I'm doing there. Their knight is inevitably coming back to c6. I mean, I can play knight h5 or something, but always bishop h6. So I feel like if queen b6, knight c6, I should take on c4. Feel that's what I should do. What if I take rook takes c4, knight c6, and then queen b6, knight takes e7, king h8, knight back to c6. I don't know. I don't know, but I might have to roll the dice. I'm going to play queen b6. Let's go for it. And on knight c6, I think I'm going to play rook takes c4 and hope for the best in that situation. It's going to be messy, but I do think that's the pawn I should take at the end of the day. White's got to play knight c6 here. Yeah. All right, so let's not hesitate. Let's take. I just really wasn't seeing anything. Rook takes b2, the obvious move. I think white's queen just comes back to c1. I think I got to try to break their structure. So definitely not thrilled by this, guys. I think missing knight d4 was actually pretty significant. But the position remains messy. It's hard to say still what's going on. Feels like white has the momentum now, but this is going to get weird. So one thing is on rook takes e7. I might have knight takes d5. I haven't fully calculated that, but knight takes d5 may work for me. Idea, queen takes d5, rook takes f4. Which conveniently overprotects f7 as well. So I think if white's going to take the pawn, it makes sense for them to take with the knight, right? It's probably pretty obvious. But there's also this desire to keep the knight on the c6 square because it keeps my queen screened from guarding d6. So I do wonder if white plays knight e7, king h8, and then just comes back to c6, what's going on there? Because then I could still try knight takes d5, but then there's bishop takes d6, I believe. Queen takes c6, bishop takes f8. And that's not going to work out well for me because white's threatening to take my knight on d5. They're also threatening to take the bishop with check. But also on knight takes e7, king h8, knight c6, I'm not sure how much of a threat bishop takes d6 is because I do have knight e4 in reply. But if they're unveiling the attack on my rook, it probably is a threat. So maybe it is something I got to take seriously. Probably the most obvious move there for me is knight e4 straight away. Hit the queen. Guard the pawn on d6. But queen d3 might be a good reply. Hit my rook, hit my knight. Very annoying that I can't use that d4 square for my rook. So I don't know what I'm going to do 100% against knight takes e7, king h8, knight back to c6. This is the dilemma I was facing with which pawn to take, because I don't think there was an easy answer there. By the way, I'm putting my queen on the 6th rank because I just always thought if I put the queen on the 7th rank, that gave white this extra optionality with rook takes e7. So I don't know how valid that was. Maybe queen d7 was worth considering too, some sort of counterplay. But let's see if white plays the knight back to c6. I mean, it'd be really nice if I could get away with knight takes d5, but I'm not seeing how I can after bishop takes d6. White's going for the throat, though, bishop h6. Okay, this move crossed my mind. This did cross my mind, but I'm actually pretty happy to see that because at minimum, it gives me rook d4 again. That's immediately where my mind goes. Rook d4. Ah, but is white going to do... Yeah, okay. There's take and knight f5. There's take and knight f5. Okay, so that I think is a thing white's probably looking at. So rook d4, they trade and knight f5, and if I take, there's queen g5 check. And that's a problem. My king gets opened. So do I try to, I don't know, like queen b4 or something? It's nice that there's not any pressure on my d6 pawn anymore. That's one thing I can take away from this. But taking knight f5 remains annoying. Maybe I got to link up with my rook somehow or play my rook back to b4. White also could be threatening to take and just play queen g5. Do I go knight g8 and just try to trade everything? That looks passive, though. Again, white can stick their knight on c6 at the end of the line. mean, rook h4 might be a move too. No, that still fails for the same reason. So knight f5. Pesky knight f5. Rook e4. Take. Is queen g5 stuff coming too? Tricky. And maybe not in a good way for me. This looks tough. Yeah, rook d4 would be nice, but it seems to just fail. Allows that knight f5 move at the end. What about knight h5 for me? Knight h5 maybe tempts g4, huh? Probably no good. Knight e4, take. Does stop queen g5. Maybe allows rook takes e4, though, and white can make a draw. Honestly, might not be a bad result for me at this point. This move looks kind of shaky in reply, though. I don't know if I trust that one. But we're getting into critical territory with time. Queen b4, still a move I'm considering. But boy, I don't know. Knight takes bishop takes g7 takes. Knight f5. Feels like one wrong move there and I'm dead. King h8. Queen h6, rook g8. There's the capture on d6 at the very least. Yikes. So I'm kind of leaning towards knight e4, but I'm not thrilled about it. I'm not so thrilled because it looks loose. But I'm not finding anything better, is the thing. Knight e4. Knight e4, queen f4, rook b4. Or queen b4, I should say. f3. Man, looks dangerous. f3 could be a problem there. Yeah, I don't see like a safe bailout move either. Like that, there's the knight g8 move, but I really don't trust that. Tactically sharp. Could I get my queen to guard the f5 square? Maybe, but it takes a while to get over there. Knight e4, queen f4. I really got to decide here pretty quickly. Queen b4, f3. Do I even have a move there after f3? Not even seeing a move at that point. Knight f2, I guess. I guess I have knight f2. Yeah, I might have to try this move, knight e4, just to try to get some counterplay because I'm not seeing anything better. The reasoning looks really weak, but I think I got to try it. Let's try it. Must counterattack. Must try. I do think white can force a draw here if they want, but based on how this game's going, it's probably a good result for me. I can pre-move king takes g7. So how could white force a draw? I think they could force a draw by what would be the easiest way to do this? Let's say knight f5. So knight f5 here, pawn takes f5, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, rook takes e4, rook takes e4, and then queen g5. And then we get a perpetual like this. Don't think white can play for a win there. This rook d3, I have f4, but it's very shaky right now. I don't have time, and I'm beginning surprised. Knight d4 like totally changed the course of this game. Wish I would have played rook b3. Still, though, we're going to be fighting here to the very end because this is not easy for white either. There's a lot of stuff to calculate. So I'm relying on queen f4, queen b4 to keep this together, but there honestly might just be too many problems. Like now I'm even saying b3. Maybe I can take against that. I don't know. Rook takes e4. There's queen takes d1. Feels super duper shaky. But I got to get white into some time pressure. So, I mean, I probably took too long to play several of these moves, but I need to throw it back at white in some complicated way. I feel like if I had played knight g8 there, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, knight c6, and I think I'm just too passive. Maybe that was the way, though. Knight f6. I don't know. Too late now. All right, so let's pre-move the king takes g7. Move again. Maybe white will go for the draw. They do take the bishop. So maybe they'll go for the whole knight f5 thing. But knight f5, do I have to actually take the knight? Probably be risky not to in this circumstance. But let's just say hypothetically, king h8, queen h6 hitting my rook, rook g8. There is knight e7 at that point. Well, let's make white find it. And white might just play queen f4. It's possible they'll go for this. So on queen d3, I'm really relying on this rook d4 move. I think that's my only move against queen d3. Otherwise, it's a double attack. I don't think white can sack the exchange. Well, they could if they want to go for this knight f5 line. Queen f4. Okay, so queen b4 I think is a must here. Oh, but then knight c6. Oh, man. Did I just miss that? Knight back to c6. Yikes. That's a killer. Oh, no. I think I looked at that. Queen b3 then. But that begs the question, should I play queen b3 right away? I actually think I might want to. Queen b3, f3? Oh, man. Not the scenario I want to be in here, but desperate times. I think queen b3 might be the most accurate move, believe it or not. I don't like the knight coming back to c6. Yeah, because I'm going to play queen b3. Because if queen b4, knight c6, queen b3, knight a5 just wins. So I think I got to do this right away. Idea, rook takes e4, queen takes d1. I remember I mentioned that in a line, but it's just all shaky at this point because it's so sharp. I have very little time. So if white plays f3, am I going knight f2? Probably have to. And then if knight f5, take queen g5, there's still that same draw possibility, which white might not go for, but we'll see. Feels like this whole construction for me is hanging on by a thread. But what can you do? Just keep it as unclear as I can with some counter pressure on white to try to get them to think. Okay, now can they still go for the draw even? I'm not sure because the moment they do this, I can play queen takes d1 with check. It maybe still results in a draw, but it's a little bit different now that I'm hitting the rook on d1. They're under 5 minutes. That's good, but this is going to get messy still, I feel. Rook c1. Whoa. Wait, can I take and play queen takes b2 against this? At minimum? Whoa, whoa, whoa. They going to take with their queen? Man, I was not expecting that move either. Okay, let's take. And hey, if white takes with the queen, I mean, I feel like I'm somewhat bailing out of this. Still knight f5 issues, though, isn't there? Might have to play pawn f5 soon. That might be my rescue operation. Yeah, maybe pawn f5. So white's threatening the knight now. I think I like pawn f5 here. So if I move the knight, knight f6, knight f5. Still not enjoying that. Let's go f5. Okay, I'm relaxing a little bit, just a little bit. because I think those trades had to have benefited me just from the standpoint of getting some defensive clarity. But make no mistake, I mean, the game is still very sharp. Wait, f3, knight f6, queen g5, king f7. I don't know. Now it's weird because the d5 pawn could be loose in some cases, but my king also feels a little exposed. f3, knight f6, queen g5, threatening. Queen takes a knight takes f5, but I have moves like queen d3, queen d3 to help defend f5 and centralize my queen. I think white's getting a little nervous too. They have moves like rook e3 here, but that blocks their queen at least. So next I might play rook f7 if I can. Kick the knight, try to get at that pawn on d5. Rook f7 or rook e8. Plays f3, yeah. So I could play the rook move. The knight f6 is the move that comes to mind, of course. Knight f6, queen g5, queen d3. I think I like that. I also, knight f6, queen g5, I can play knight takes d5. Yeah, let's retreat the knight. I can actually do this, can't I? Because if knight takes f5, my rook joins the defense. And rook e7 shouldn't work. Did white miss that? Maybe. Now they have rook e6, but this gets weird. Rook e6 I can take on d5. There's maybe even rook f7. I think the tide is changing here a little bit, guys. Knights are really good around your king for defensive purposes, so I like that that knight is back on a stable square. Queen g5, knight takes d5. Should be good. I mean, there's still some resources around my king. My queen is far away, so that's maybe not so comforting, but everything else seems to be in good position. And I would love to get to a queen ending with an extra pawn. That would be a dream scenario. Yeah, queen g5 played. So knight takes d5. What gives? How does white create problems there? Don't know if I'm seeing it. I mean, queen d3 was my other move, but I don't know that that's even necessary. Let's take. Maybe knight c6, but that's got to be going the wrong direction. Let's pre-move the capture. Don't think it'll happen, but I can pre-move it. So I'm probably not threatening knight takes e7. Brings the queen back. Okay, there's rook e8. Knight takes f5. Knight takes f5. Queen d2. That's a nice move. I missed that one. Does it work? Queen b4? Can I play that move? Queen b4. Idea, queen takes d5, queen takes e1. I got to decide soon. I think that works. Tidy defensive move. Definitely didn't plan that. Didn't see queen d2. Maybe white goes queen e1, but then I can move my knight at least, because they're tied to their rook on e1. So queen d1, maybe knight f4. Yeah, that almost seemed forced, actually. So knight f4. That rook is very awkward for white. Let's do it. So they still can't take this pawn, importantly. The whole premise. And, I might be looking for a chance to play queen d4. This is kind of what I'm getting at. Knight c6. Okay, but now if I take, I'm threatening checkmate. Queen is safe, guarding the diagonal. Let's go for it. It's a pretty big threat because white can't put a piece on the second rank to defend. So am I just winning here? Rook e7, king h6. White can play queen a1, but that's going to be a 2-pawn down ending they're going to have to defend. I think I completely turned this around. Or maybe more accurately, my opponent just... they're kind of the same thing, but white didn't play that attack right. Yeah, I think white has to go queen a1 here and try to defend 2 pawns down. Otherwise, they get mated. I probably can't get cute there. I think I just have to trade queens. Trade queens, maybe rook f7 at that point. Just guard the 7th rank. I can actually probably play rook c8. Rook c8 and start pushing. Yeah, so white does go on the defensive. Huge sigh of relief for me these past few moves, I'll tell you that. So take rook c8 probably. I don't think I should fear rook a7. I don't think that does a whole lot. Well, let's take. Rook c8, rook c7. Which way do I go with my king? Really king f6, huh? I don't think I should worry about the h-pawn. And then knight e7, I have rook e8. Knight back to c6. Perhaps rook g2 at that point. Okay. Yeah, I think rook c8. But, there's a knight in the mix, so we always got to be careful. Enemy knight in the mix. Yeah, king f6 feels principled. King f6, knight e7, rook e8. And the best they have there is a knight coming back to e6, or c6 rather. Okay, they play knight a5, and now I was thinking I could push the c-pawn. Just roll the c-pawn. c4, rook a6, king e6, let's say. There's knight b7, I suppose. D5 maybe? D5 or H5 perhaps? Let's go D5. I'm using a little too much time. I'm not going to worry about the H pawn. Just let white have that. I think the C pawn's got to be too strong. Keep pushing. So it could take H3, but that seems like I'm losing my coordination for no reason. Let's stay coordinated. C3, knight back, C2. Let's push the pass pawn. I'm seeing I can even play rook b1 here if I need to. Or rook b8, rather. Knight c5 looks like a very good move. C2, knight c1 is most obvious. I kind of like rook b8. I think I'm going to go rook b8. Force rook a3. Just seems like a really nice move to have to force. Then I won't have to consider rook takes h7 at all. Still a few minor logistical things to work through, but actually maybe it's simple. Rook a3, I can play c2 because I threaten rook takes b3. So rook a3, c2, knight c1, and then rook comes back. So knight a1 can't be a good square for the knight, but I understand why white did that. Rook b2 maybe? Looks simple. Yeah, I like this. Keeps that knight contained. King e1, and then bring the knight in or push the d pawn. Probably push the pawn. Push another pawn. d4, king king d1, d3. Threatening checkmate, actually. Yeah, it's got to be winning. King D1, D3. And if king C1, okay, plays rook A3. So maybe I get the knight involved now, knight C5. Could go for a little mating net, knight C5, king D1. Try for rook D1 at the end. Also play D3 right here. I think knight C5 is just the most tidy move, though. Prevents knight B3. Just everything working. And here I can give a check, which forces white to go the other way, because then they go towards the queen side. I have knight D3 followed by rook B2. Is there a mating net, though? So if I play knight D3 first, white has knight C2. So probably should give the check first. But many things to do at this point. Knight E4 also looks good. Let's give the check. I can actually force the king all the way back over to G1 if I want. Knight D3, rook F2. That's kind of funny. Knight D3. Can't quite play C2 because white has knight takes C2. But we're close. I'm actually tempted to bring my king up now. Although it seems unnecessary. So knight D3, king F1, rook F2, king G1. And then maybe... maybe rook B2 at that point. Because if knight B3, I can actually take and play B2. Yeah, I think it makes sense to just keep driving their king over. Check. Play like this. They have some checks, but they're inconsequential. So my idea is if knight B3, I'll take. And then C2, and I'm even guarding the C3 square for good measure. I can go check and play rook C6, but we promote knight helping out. It comes back. Still resisting. Maybe now I get the king up. So white can't really do much here. So maybe time to bring the king in. I can also... I can't quite check and play that, because check there's king E2. I was thinking check, and if the king went somewhere, take on A1 and then C2. That's not quite working out yet. So I think I might get the king involved. I like where all my pieces are. Could play H5 as well, by the way. It's almost in Zugzwang here. Actually, yeah, what's the rush? H5, because knight takes B3 still fails. Let's play H5. Just put a stop to G4. So king E6, knight B3, takes, still wins. Let's bring the king. Maybe I march in like this. Set up a mating net. This is by no means the only way to win, right? I'm sure there's concretely faster ways to do it, but white has so little counterplay here, we can just shut down the conceivable avenues that we see for counterplay and then go from there. Continue improving our position. I'm up 2 connected pawns. Pieces are much better. This is kind of like that game against Banana Monkey towards the end. Very similar. Just total control. Just don't give counterplay. or don't give needless counterplay, I should say. You can allow some counterplay if you figured out how you can win, but don't just give them something that you don't have to give them. Check. So king d5. Watching out for stalemates, but definitely no stalemates. Yeah, I think I was lost in this game. I got to say, I think after knight d4, at least I didn't see a way that I could easily diffuse that and even obtain an equal position. I think I was worse after knight d4, unless there's some very concrete resource I missed. But that's the type of momentum changing move. When white played that, I had just had a sinking feeling. Just felt like it wasn't going to work. Okay, so white takes the pawn because if I check, they have king e2. But I can check and play knight c1 and then go take the knight. So that's probably the way to kill this. There's also c2. But checking knight c1 is nice. It would be really nice to have my king on e4 already so I can go for the mating net, but that allows that unnecessary counterplay. So no point. Let's just play like this. All right. Thanks to my opponent for the game. They resign. Ooh, close call, guys. Close call. Yeah, knight d4, the momentum shifted. That was a clear game changer with the momentum. It's a pattern I've seen before, but in that position, I can't explain it. I just blanked on it. It was nice. It's very imaginative by white. Because you think that d4 square is just under black's control. But when I put my rook there, and white had previously played c4, I have trouble with tactical ideas like that sometimes, by the way, where this is a common thing people struggle with. But on the move prior, knight d4 just looks so inconceivable. It wasn't on my radar. This idea just wasn't on my radar. But once c4 is played, and then I'm relying on my c-pawn to defend the rook, my c-pawn is overloaded. So I'll be very curious what the computer says after knight d4. And I spent a ton of time. I was kind of happy to see bishop h6. I was really not sure what to do just against knight c6. Really uncertain about that. So I'm curious what the computer says there. And I think after knight e4, I don't know. Maybe bishop takes g7 isn't the best. I was wondering about queen f4 right away. Keep the tension, because I can't really see a universe where I'm taking on h6 anytime soon. Because queen takes h6, my rook is hit. Maybe. But somehow allowing my king to coordinate with the rook, get a little more centralized, seemed to do me a favor. But there were ways white could have tried to set up this draw, right? So knight f5, pawn takes, and then rook takes e4 with queen g5. So I'm going to be curious what the computer says about that. Rook c1, I think, has to be the wrong move. That's probably where white's momentum starts to stall out. And then after f5, f3, knight f6, queen g5, knight takes d5, I think I'm back in the driver's seat. I will give myself credit, though. I think I found a nice move here with queen b4. Maybe there's some other move that's also good, but this was a nice find by me to keep the fire burning. Because white's trying to get me to take their knight so that they can take on d6 at the end. Maybe there's some way I can get to some pawn up, queen ending, but my king is open. But this was nasty because I know white doesn't want to play a pawn down endgame and with their knight trapped basically as well. It's probably losing. So I kind of sense white's most likely busted around here. And then once they get here, this is definitely busted. Just had to play carefully. Got a little lower on the clock than I would like in that ending. I think when I was deciding on d5. But you want to stay coordinated. I'm kind of glad I went for d5. So I was looking at c4. I'm sure c4 is good, but c4, rook a6. And I was just seeing if my king comes up, there's annoying knight jumps white has. You don't want to blunder into a fork somehow, like allowing knight e7. So yeah, we'll check that tactical middle game, but I really wish I would have played rook b3 here, or maybe rook b7. Defend the pawn, tried to go for queen b8. I think then I'm a little bit better. Maybe not. I mean, maybe white can get their bishop to that c3 square, but this was a game changer. That was a momentum shifter for sure. But I think white went wrong in the complications. It was very sharp. It wasn't easy to figure this stuff out. And that's kind of why I ultimately played this way, because it wasn't clear to me. You know, it could be something. Queen d4, queen d3, there's always this rook d4 move. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm really not sure. I think opening-wise, though, it would have been better for white to put their queen on d3. And that would have avoided much of my counterplay that I had when b5 came. And I was able to break out. So I'm pretty sure the computer's going to say white's better on queen d3. White played the opening very well, in my estimation. So thanks again to When Rooks Fly for the game. Gave me a real fight here. And yeah, I happened to come up with it in the end, but not simple. Very entertaining game. Hope you guys like that. Let's take a look at the analysis. Super curious about this. Yeah, rook b4 is a mistake. What's the graph look like? Ooh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so this does, I think, mirror my feeling about this. Although it says by the time I played queen b3 later, I'm actually out of the woods at this point, which it didn't feel that way in the game. In some ways, it's fortunate that I have queen b3 to hit this rook on d1 and prevent rook takes e4. However, I will say I did mention that. I don't know if I mentioned it in this form, but I think I did mention that. Queen b4, queen b3. But I was for sure feeling quite shaky around here. Yeah, had me on the ropes, someone said. That's 100% true. 100% true. So I avoided some of the mainline Jobava stuff by not going for d5, which I would usually do. But, you know, there's a lot of theory here. I feel okay-ish playing the black side of this, but this is like a full-fledged mainline now, where I just have had lots of games where white does this sort of stuff. Bishop d3. Actually, they usually play it. How do they play it? With an early g4, a lot of times, is what they'll do. So they'll try to flood you on the queen side with their pawns. They'll play f3, g4, h4, that sort of, or they'll flood you on the king side with their pawns. I just wasn't in the mood to allow that. So I went for this Benoni formation. Yeah, engine's indicating about a half pawn edge. So I think this is all standard stuff. Knight a6 has been played in the Masters database. There's also bishop g4, which scores a little better. That scores better for black. Yeah, because as I was describing, if you put the knight on d7, you're blocking the bishop. So the knight coming to its seemingly natural square always entails blocking that bishop, and hence bishop g4. So how do games usually go? I thought take, knight d7, and then queen back to d1. Yeah, to dodge the fork. I just wasn't sure how to generate counterplay here. How do they play like this? Okay, they kind of do the same thing, but work up to b5 through this route. Interesting. So this knight e8, knight c7 route, that's an alternative way a knight can get to c7. Yeah, black seems a little less cramped compared to my game because at least they've exchanged a pair of pieces. But white does still have the bishop pair, probably an edge. Yeah, still comfortable for white. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would play this way in a tournament game against a strong player. Not that my opponent isn't strong, but this is an unrated game. I was mostly going for time, you know, the surprise value, trying not to get down on time too much. But this is a little dicey, I think, for playing in some of these encounters here. But we see good players playing this as black. But you see the eval, it tends to favor white, these structures. And black's cramped. So knight a6, knight c7. Explain the reasoning for that. I don't know that I would have played a4 so soon. I think I would have gone rook e1 if I were white. Because to me, rook e1 seems like a mandatory move where you always want to defend the pawn on e4, but you may or may not play pawn a4. Like you probably will. Probably, I don't know. 9 times out of 10, yes, black's going to play a6 at some point, and you're going to want to stop them with a4. But if b5 is not yet a threat, and you have this pawn on e4 backed up, I think you'd rather have rook e1 in every case versus a4. So small thing there. It's been played before, though, plenty of times. Yeah, and actually, I think I should have thought about this e6 move. I played the most popular move according to the Masters database, b6, but it's not even in the top 5 for engine suggestions. It's maybe a little too slow. So e6 is a suggested engine move. And if takes, you can take with the bishop. Black has a backward pawn, but at least they've freed their situation here, freed their position. And the knight is pretty handy on e6. Controls a lot of territory. So I think I should have considered that move. I went b6. I thought all this was fine for white. Rook e1, a6. I just thought queen d3. Was really not sure what to do there because queen d3 shuts down the b5 plans. And it also has the benefit of holding me up on the a6 point if I ever try to go rook b8 and bishop a8. So there's some games here, but I don't know. I don't really trust this for black. Knight ce8, knight d7, queen b8. Ugh. So if white puts a stop to b5, continues to mass their pieces in the center, rook d1 probably coming next, work up to e5, this could get ugly. Because let's just say I play, I don't even know how I organize this. Let's say I play rook b8, rook ad1, and then something passive like knight d7. e5 is still coming. White has 1, 2, 3 defenders on this pawn. And if there's a big old trade here, usually white's going to come out on top because they can keep d5 well guarded. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defenders of d5 compared to my 3 attackers. The pawn on e7 is loose. They can double up against that pawn. It's hard for me to get in e6. This is roughly what white should be aiming for, I think. Interesting also, the computer's mentioning rook b1. Yeah, this is a move I touched on. I would have rather seen rook b1 than queen d3, for sure. But rook b1, white can think about playing b4. Although it appears, the way the engine's thinking about this move, what if I just play like rook b8 or something? Yeah, maybe it's playing rook b1 as a defensive move where, in the end, it's nice to have the b pawn defended. Yeah. But I do think white would have liked their queen on d3 versus being on d2 to support the bishop and just completely shut down the b5 counterplay. So queen d2, I played rook b8. There's a couple games with queen d7, interestingly. Oh, okay, so this is kind of what I was talking about. e5, knight h5. This looks bizarre. It looks like you shouldn't be able to do this, but yeah, queen d7, that's another way to support b5, isn't it? When white's queen is on d3 instead of d2. I still wonder if white just played this, what black's really doing here. And there are games in that played in that way. But you're always meeting e5. Oh, not with knight h5 here. I guess you can take, and maybe there's enough weakness on d5 that you can eventually go after this pawn. White can't play knight c6 because of takes with the black rook on d8. That's one thing I'll have to keep in mind with this arrangement. So queen d7, maybe that's something I've gone for in the past. It's hard to remember because it's 20 years since I played a lot of this, in tournaments at least. So I went rook b8, but it does seem like rook b8 is kind of slow. But yeah, rook d1 is a mistake. It allows this b5 breakout. So white could have played e5. And this is what I was mentioning, right? Knight h5, bishop f2, or bishop h2, f5. And the computer doesn't really buy it. But I think from a human standpoint, it's not so simple to deal with this. Black grabs a little space. You can't trap the knight on the edge of the board because, well, you can, but black's opening up rook takes f3. So that's the tactical justification for putting the knight on the edge of the board. And black might shove this pawn to f4 and box out that bishop if white allows it. So I know the engine is saying that this is fine for white, or much better even. But this looks kind of weird. I mean, you're leaving e5 hanging, I guess, because there's d6 stuff. But yeah, this is a method of playing for black. You really see how black has to play around these center pawns. Like, I'm kind of tweaking on the flanks here. I'm tinkering around. I'm playing b4. I'm going for knight h5, f5. Some pretty avant-garde stuff, but clearly white is better in the center. Black has to manage that part of the board very carefully. And that's why you're seeing all this flank play by black. So it looks like e5 is objectively good. I think queen d3 still. I think for those of you who play the white side of this setup, that's probably the takeaway. Putting the queen on d3 is the most testing thing. So let's see, b5, we get this trade. Yeah, knight takes. I also thought if bishop takes, surprised the computer thinks this is better for white. So how does this work? So in between move. Okay, I saw this. Thought I would be at least equal here at the end. But maybe not. Maybe not. There is still this lingering pressure on d6. Pretty much a level evaluation, though. Tiny, tiny edge for white. Yeah, maybe they can send the knight into c4. How does that work? I have to go for some active counterplay or something. And if take, there's the bishop hanging at the end. So again, you see black kind of playing on the flanks to try to justify what white is doing in the center, or push back against that. It's okay. Knight takes b5 seem logical. So bishop f1 is also playable, huh? Yeah, see, this was the scenario I was describing where I thought I would be really rocking and rolling. But even here, the engine says white's doing fine. Despite the knight going to the edge of the board, despite black breaking out with the b pawn. I mean, white does still have e5 on the table in a lot of positions. Harder now with the knight no longer guarding c3, but there's other ideas. Bishop h6, c4. Okay, but given the position I had a few moves ago, in general, I was very happy after b5. And finally spotting some concrete way to break out. Okay, so yeah, I thought all this was forced, but bishop d3 is playable. I mean, that move crossed my mind, but seemed passive. I do have to save the bishop, though. So bishop c6 and then b3. The way I was thinking about it, I believe that I would be at least equal here with the compact structure versus white's two islands. Usually you want fewer pawn islands. But white still is very nicely centralized. So I can see why the computer still likes white here. Bishop h6 is still on the table. I still have to watch e5. That's funny. Because I think my opponent and I were both thinking this whole line was more or less forced. But the engine finds ways that white can play alternatively. Yeah. So I let my sense of danger down here. Rook b4, natural move, but a big mistake. That's a plus. That's a point. Full point error. And very well spotted by white. I really got to give my opponent props to that. Because this one decision and white's vigilance to set this up, spot this in advance, almost won them this game. Because I started burning a ton of time. I got into, I think what we're going to see was probably close to a losing position. And yeah, white very nearly got me there. So good idea to remember. There are situations where the knight can unexpectedly appear on d4 in this structure. Yeah, so I needed to keep my rook safer. Rook b3, rook b7. Really wish I would have done something like this. Computer says equal. I would take black here in this one. It's still the two pawn islands for white versus the one uninterrupted island for me, but I would take black. It just looks easier to play. It's so funny, though, because I was mentioning here debating whether I should take more time on rook b4. And I was saying, well, am I really going to talk myself into playing rook b3? Probably not. Rook b4 looks so good. I thought, white's going to have to do like this, and then I'm going to come here and attack b2. Yeah, I saw a line like this, and maybe I gradually start pressuring white, defend the e-pawn. Even this is still equal, apparently, but knight d4, nice move. And my c-pawn is overloaded, like I was saying. So it appears I found a decent way of playing. Is this at all legitimate? Takes a knight d7 to guard? No. Okay, so I was right to be skeptical of this. It just seemed like such a cop-out to have to sacrifice the exchange. But it crosses your mind when you get surprised by this, because that knight appearing on c6 is just so destructive. Going after, getting really to the heart of my position. Knocking out the e-pawn, making d6 weak, disrupting my coordination. It's nasty. Yeah, so the way I played it, this can transpose. So queen b6, knight c6. So if I take on b2, knight takes e7, king h8. I just didn't see what I was doing after queen c1. And I didn't like how solid c4 and d5 looked, how weak d6 looked for me, and the fact that white had a simple plan of just putting the knight back to c6. I really didn't see what I was doing here. So the computer says queen b3 or knight h5. Queen b3 allows bishop takes d6. Some sort of counterattack. Yeah, I mean, this looks sketchy. Looks sketchy, but that's probably the type of thing I'm having to get involved in at this point, is sketchiness. I don't think I'm getting some clean solution here once I miss knight d4. That's all it takes in chess. As soon as this move hits the board and it's evident that I missed it, you see the eval. I can't run from that. And that's a messy plus 1.1. Messy in white's favor because they have all the momentum. That was my dilemma with rook takes b2. I just didn't like how solid white appeared, even if they don't take the pawn on e7 right away. So I went for the more confusing looking option, rook takes c4, that also seemed to give me some potential dynamic play. Yeah. So I think I mentioned this in the game. I thought knight back to c6, and I was not sure what to do. It blocks my queen, it guards the d4 square, and it threatens bishop takes d6, most importantly. I mean, I probably would have had to try my luck with this knight e4 type stuff again, but I think knight e4 now is just bad, right? Because queen d3 works. Yeah, hit the rook, hit the knight. And the huge difference here is that white's knight is on c6 guarding d4. So I think that was a break in my favor, that my opponent didn't play their knight back to c6. They went for the attack with bishop h6, which is still pretty good, to be fair. But you know what? I think if I were playing a GM here, they would have definitely put the knight back on c6 and thrown the ball back at me. Say, hey, I'm going to put this knight on this square that we both know is awkward because you just spent a bunch of time figuring out how you're going to deal with the knight coming there. So I've grabbed the pawn. I pull the knight back. What are you going to do about bishop takes d6? Maybe my opponent calculated knight takes d5 here. Idea queen takes d5, rook takes f4, but I don't think it worked for me. Bishop takes d6. This is the move I was mentioning. Hit the rook. Because crucially, my knight on d5 is loose at the end. So if we get this, yeah, temporarily I have two minor pieces. The white takes. Also, if rook d4, I saw this nuance too. Trying to run an in-between move. White takes would check on g7, which indicates how my king is a liability. Because if my king is on g8 here, I think this move works. I think that might actually work out. Maybe there's something with queen c2, but king takes f8 probably works. So, yeah, maybe white got a little exuberant here with bishop h6, but it still put me under enormous pressure. I was at 745. I went down to 143. I hate to burn all that time. I know you guys are pulling your hair out, but you got to understand this is a really tough position for me. I'm one bad move away from being completely busted. So queen d8. Ugh, man, that's allow knight c6. You know, maybe the best risk-adjusted move here is knight g8. Maybe that's what I should have done because I identified that move. I just really hated to play it. I just thought take, and the knight comes back to c6. And I didn't like how passive I was. But given how much time I took, maybe I should get down to 3-4 minutes and just play knight g8. Because knight e4 was really flirting with disaster. And I bet there's just a concretely very good line here for white. Maybe this was influenced by my opponent's rating too. I still harbored hopes of kind of what happened in the game, turning this one around. I didn't want to give them some easy path to just get to some technical position like this where it feels like I'm passive. But I don't know, knight f6. I still have a little bit of pressure. Yeah, this is, I think, what I should have done. Knight g8. I think that would have been the more disciplined decision. Maybe they would have traded everything off. Probably not, but that would have been a dream. Because now the only real imbalance is the pawn structure, not the knight activity anymore. So I can probably start dreaming of pressuring them. So knight e4, how does white punish me here? What's the best way to do this? Queen e2 ideas. So queen e2. Okay, I don't think that move was on my radar whatsoever. Block the rook's attack on the knight, hit the rook on e4, and leave the bishop hanging. Wow. Ah, yeah, that... Once the engine spits it out, you start to see why it's good. My coordination remains poor here. Because if queen b4, there's always this knight c6 move. So yeah, white can trade and do this. Queen a4, rook a1, or even b3. Lure me into a fork. And I'm busted. And also, probably similar stuff if rook b4. Trade and knight c6. Everything leads this knight coming back to c6. To me, that was the thing that really stood out in many of these calculations in the game, even if I wasn't articulating it. In all these lines, the knight coming back to this anchored square, wreaking havoc, controlling so many nice avenues for counterplay for me, and blocking defensive avenues would have been very nice. That's a tough move, though, queen e2. It's just not so natural to disconnect your queen and your bishop and block the rook. Probably in a game, it's going to be this version of it. Yeah, take and then queen e2. And I'm too shaky. What's my best move? Queen b5? Oh, and then queen d3. Okay, that's a heck of an adjustment. Why is that so good? Knight f6. Again, knight c6. Oh, and am I in trouble here because white's threatening something like b3? Oh my, and I can't play rook b4 because the knight guards. Yeah, b3 is the threat here. And I have to sacrifice the exchange somehow. Oh man. Nasty. All right. I mean, that makes me feel a little bit better about knight e4. Because that it seems to revolve around this queen e2 thing. The way that white punishes me. Still, what they did is pretty good. Okay, but not queen f4. That move gives away all the edge. What was I also thinking here? Okay, so the draw, let's say take and knight f5. This I thought could always lead to a draw. Take, rook takes e4. And then whichever way I take on e4, let's say with the rook, queen g5, and perpetual like this. And if white lifts the rook, I think I can always play, like if they play rook d3, I can always play f4 if needed to guard. It looks like there's ways to play for a win too. Rook b8, and I guess I somehow trickle out with my king. So maybe I'd be curious when rooks fly. Thanks again for the game. If you're still watching this or you happen to be watching this, I'd be curious if you want to post in the comments what you were thinking about around this time in the game, because you have a lot of nice ways to play, but they're not so simple. And were you optimistic? I'm sure, you know, you liked your position, but did you think this was close to winning? What was going through your head here? I'd be very curious. So I don't know. I mean, given the rating differential and the fact that probably when I broke out with B5, the momentum was swinging in my favor, I wouldn't have been surprised to see white go for this line and try to make a draw. But to white's credit, I mean, they played for a win, and why shouldn't they? You see that queen e2 is the move here. It's still tough, but queen e2 breaks my coordination. It seems like I can't keep the rook and the knight defended. I can go through contortions, but that knight coming to c6, and in the case of this move, there's rook d3. Another move to hurt me. Rook e3 on the way. Seems like there's always something with the knight coming to c6 to absolutely break my coordination. That's tough. I don't know. I said maybe the more disciplined, better thing to do is knight g8. That's probably true on a purely objective basis, but what do you guys think? Knight e4? Super shaky move. I mean, flying by the seat of our pants here, but do you like that decision versus knight g8? What do you think under the circumstances? I was trying to play like a trend-breaking move. Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky talks about this in his book, The Road to Chess Improvement, which I highly recommend, by the way. Excellent book. When the momentum is going against you, you're down on the clock, you have a bad position, any number of factors going against you, you got to look for moves that try to pose some problems to your opponent and try to break that trend. And it felt like knight e4 was the way to do that. But a lot of that's in hindsight as well. It happens to not lose on the spot, and it so happens that the refutation is hard to find. And even then, it looks like there's some ways I can defend down an exchange. But does that justify it? I don't know. Jury's out. So queen f4, and now queen b3. So, yeah, counterattacking the rook. I thought queen b4 was just bad because of knight c6, and I'm hanging by a thread here. But the engine finds knight f6. Wow, counterattack. And somehow this gives me enough to hold. Queen takes d6, queen takes b2. Yeah, I didn't see that one. I stopped calculating after queen b4, knight c6. That's a tough counterattacking move. Knight f6. Getting the knight out of danger and hitting the queen. Very difficult stuff. So queen b3. And rook c1 is actually okay. I was critical of that move. It felt wrong to me, but it's actually okay. So if f3, what was I going to do on f3? Let me try to remember. I think knight f2 was a thought. But also maybe rook e8? Rook e8 counterattack? Yeah. Because remember, white can never play rook takes e2 because of queen takes d1 check. Or never play rook takes e4 because of queen takes d1 check. Does this move work too? I saw some lines like this vaguely. Well, queen takes f3. Oh my. Oh my. Stopping knight f5. And if pawn takes f3, knight takes g5. Oh my gosh. That is nasty. Queen g5 looks dangerous here, right? Because of knight f5 with the pin on the g-pawn. Queen takes f3. Engines, man. They always come up with crazy stuff. I probably would have gone for this if this position occurred. And then likely we're going to have some draw. Can't go king h8 because of mate in 2. So likely we get some draw here like this. Or maybe white could go for this, and then we get this sort of draw once again. Yeah, so I wasn't expecting rook c1. I thought f3 would make sense. Knight c6 still maybe. This move probably is legitimate too. But trading those bishops and getting my king a little closer, that helps a lot. That helps a lot, but still pretty messy. Still a pretty messy position. So rook takes c1. White correctly took. I have other moves, I guess, than rook takes c1, but white correctly took with the queen. And now f5, that's justified. Queen d3, queen b4. Lots of moves are okay here, apparently. But I liked f5 because it anchored my knight, gave my king a little more breathing room. It more or less shut down knight takes f5. F3, knight F6. And I totally get why white played queen G5 here. That move looks natural. Oh, white can defend after knight takes D5, huh? Yeah, when this hit the board, this is where I really started to think now I might win this game versus just trying to survive. So how does white hold here? One line it's giving is take and queen E3. And I guess with queen C3 or maybe a piece coming to E7, maybe there's enough to draw. I don't know. That seems like a tough evaluation. And if I do this, I get it. So white can round the pawn up. But what if I play like king H6, king H2? Okay. The engine says white has compensation here, but that's not an easy eval to make. I'm not even sure why that is. I guess it's hard to advance these pawns, and my king is the more exposed one. That's tough, though. So what's that rook E6 move? Rook E6. Because that threatens rook takes G6. Oh. Rook takes G6, pawn takes G6, queen takes G6, king H8, and then queen H6 checkmate. Wow, that's a nice one. And I guess I can put a piece on F6. But then let's say rook F6, I run into takes. And if knight takes, there's knight takes F5. And white's definitely not worse anymore. So very concrete move here, rook E6. There's other moves too that virtually keep the balance. Even moves like king H1, king H2. I get why white played queen D2 though, because you just lost a pawn here. As white, you're thinking you got to keep forcing the tempo, keep forcing the play. But if white does something like this and then rook E7 and we just get a trade, again, I would have loved this. Queen ending up a pawn, I probably have more winning chances than with queen and rook on the board and still up a pawn. The D pawn becomes much more dangerous. Still chances of a perpetual for white at some point, but wow, rook E6. So what would I have to do there? Knight F4. Okay, that's a nice rejoinder. Attack the rook. Defend G6, because if queen takes F4, take the rook. But that allows rook takes D6. Now queen E3, king H2. And there's knight takes G2. There's also queen E5. All sorts of interplay between the pieces here. Rook D7. And somehow the discoveries aren't good. Check, but there's F4. Really complicated stuff. Yeah, I'm not surprised that we didn't think or think to consider something like rook E6 here. White didn't, and I didn't think about it in the game. Queen D2 at first sight appears good, because I see what white's going for. Take, and then take on D6 at the end. I mean, that seems sound. But queen B4, yeah, that's probably my best move of the game, queen B4. Funny, because rook B4, putting a piece on that same square was my mistake earlier in the game, allowing knight D4. But now I avenge myself on the B4 square. The queen said, "Don't worry, rook brother. I got your back. I will avenge you." And again, it works because of queen takes D5, queen takes E1, which wins the house. Wow. So yeah, the computer's indicating something of a standoff here. If white plays king H2 or rook E6, crazy complications still, but this ends in equality. What was this crazy line I saw? Rook F6, rook takes E3. It was saying queen E3? No, queen D1. Queen D1, and then take. So on knight takes F5, king F7, the pawn is defended. Versus if the queen's over here. I see. There's some line where queen E3 was being shown. Don't recall where. Oh, is it this? Rook takes D6, which works because of this. And here, queen E3. Okay, that's just a queen trade. Many ways this could be technically equal, it looks like. Okay, so queen B4 was played. Yeah, and this is tough for white. They played queen D1, trying to maintain a presence on the D file. But now after knight F4, it looks like I'm close to winning. So best move was queen f2. Tough move to play, though. Taking the queen off the d file. Yeah, I probably would have just traded there and then played rook f7 and tried to win this up a pawn. Maybe I would have done something different, but I don't know if I would have tempted my luck. I think I wanted to get rid of this knight at this point. That's for sure. That knight that's been causing me so many problems over the past 10 moves. Yep, so found a good sequence here. You got to be willing to fully seize the moment when the momentum shifts in your direction. And I felt like it was at this point. Yeah, again, I can see why White went queen d1, because if they trade queens, not only are they down a pawn, but most importantly, their knight is trapped. I guess they could go rook d1, rook e8, knight d5. But they're going to face an uphill battle. If we can get down to a single major piece in this endgame, yeah, this looks winning for black. Pawn's too strong. My king can come up behind. White's b pawn is very weak. Yeah, I believe that's winning. So this all happened. Queen takes b2, and suddenly White's king is the one with massive issues. Yeah, I thought if rook e7, I can just hide the king. Oh, okay, this is a defense I didn't consider. Rook e7 making way for queen f1. Uh-huh. The white is very passive here. Yeah, rook a8 threatening rook a1. That looks crushing. Yeah, if white has to do something like this, surely this must be winning. Okay, that was the meat of this game because the rest was technical phase. I don't know if I played this perfect. Probably. I'm sure I didn't, but started seeing a few ghosts here. Looks like the engine is not very impressed. It just thinks I can directly go for this stuff. Just push the pawn. Excuse me. But I don't think I ever at all gave white chances in this ending. Kept things coordinated. Yeah, white played knight a1 because if knight c1, there's rook b1. And if rook a3, I can just play c2 with the threat of rook takes b3 in promotion. White's king is a little too far away, so... yeah, many ways to win this. Chose a slightly circuitous one. Really taking my time, but like I said in that game with Banana Monkey, you can just look to take away your opponent's counterplay and take your time on the board in the position when you're technically winning like that. Don't give your opponent any unnecessary counterplay. All right. Yeah, roller coaster game. Knight d4 almost bucked me off this Bronco. I thought I had everything tamed here, but that was just a very unpleasant surprise. I don't think I gathered myself all that well from a time standpoint, from a making the best of your chances standpoint. I don't know. Again, I'm really curious what you guys think. Knight e4. I think I'm okay with that in hindsight. It was hard for me to find a refutation of this. It looked shaky. For sure, it looked shaky. But then again, there were a lot of things that looked shaky for me here. I didn't think I could escape playing something shaky. So this move gave me a chance. I mean, I don't know that I would have won the game if I had played knight g8. That was technically the better move. And yeah, I think for white, knight c6. I think get that knight back on that anchored square would have caused me all sorts of problems. Just not pulling the trigger yet on anything forcing. But threatening bishop takes d6. That weak pawn on d6 is my Achilles heel. My king, a little bit. We saw I had issues with the king, but that pawn on d6 is the real problem with the knight coming in, knocking out the e7 support. And then if you pivot back, I just always have a hard time solving this stuff. Queen c7, there's rook e7. Okay, fascinating game. So I moved to 5 out of 6 in the Lone Wolf League. A lot of chess still yet to be played. Every game I've had so far in this league has been interesting. We'll see what next week brings. Thanks again to When Rooks Fly. Would love to hear your thoughts. And thanks again to all of you guys for watching and supporting. And do take a look at the league and maybe consider it if you want some high-level competition and some heart-pounding classical chess, classical over-the-board chess. Rapid, classical, it's somewhere in between. So All right. Thanks again, guys. Have a great week. And I'll see you guys next week with round 7.